So, well, good morning. Here we are at October 25th. And as the invitation said, we're going to talk about refinishing clock cases today. You don't have to carry them around in a Mini Cooper, Andrew, just to have them need some restoration. But I thought I'd bring up a couple of topics, and then I thought I would share one of my greatest resources for figuring out what to do in refinishing a clock case. Clock cases come with all kinds of finishes on them, everything from lacquer to spray can paint. And I want to start by saying, when it comes down to refinishing your clock, you make the decision on what it should look like. I have the very first clock that or the oldest clock I have in my collection, I actually purchased from a surfer who needed money for rent, and it had cigarette burns on the top of it. It was an enamel on wood black case, and I decided I wanted it to look like wood, so I completely stripped it. If I took it to a mart, people would say, well, this isn't original. I said, yeah, I know, but you know what? It's my clock, and I like it this way. So I don't want anybody to say there's a right way and a wrong way. There's just a lot of different techniques for getting to the finish that you want on your clock. This conversation is going on because Beverly brought a couple of clocks to the Clocktoberfest here in Louisville and said, well, what do I do with this? And I think she probably got 25 answers, and then she has to go home and make her own mind up and experiment with different techniques to see if she can get the finish that she appreciates. I'm going to go to a share screening here and reveal my greatest secret for knowing how to and learning different techniques for refinishing a clock case. So every time I do this, I think, what the heck? How do I get there from here? Okay, well, this is a shameless promotion, but as members of the NAWCC, there's always this mystery called the NAWCC website. Well, I happen to enjoy going to the forum. If you go to the website, you don't have to log into this particular section of the NAWCC.org. You can go directly to the forums, and in the forums, you'll find that there are all kinds of categories. Now, you have an option here. You'll see advertisements popping up, and I don't like advertisements. So what I do is I log in here at the forum, and ta-da, the advertisements, except for those that the NAWCC puts up over in the right-hand column, all disappear. So today we're talking about clock case restoration, and there happens to be a tag here under clock repair and restoration and design. There happens to be a case construction and restoration. If you go into that, you'll find that there's a couple of tips that they always put in on how to post and making a good thing. Hide glue 101, since there's lots of questions about it, that has a specific thread that addresses those. And when you see those, you'll see that there are lots of views. Here's 41 comments about hide glue, but there's 52,000 people that went there to learn something. So in this section, you can scroll down and you can see somebody's got an electric neon clock that they're restoring and are wondering about the case. And it says yesterday, old F. Webster gave them some tips on that. There's a cuckoo clock, stain or paint. It's a good question. If you put your cursor over the topic, it actually shows you in a balloon what the person is asking. The initial, the start of the thread. If you have a New Haven movement, shellac versus airbrush, Beverly might want to take a look at that. The other good thing about this is you can scroll down, you can look at all kinds of things, mahogany cases, trim on them, what's a banjo case, what goes on it. You'll see that they just scrolling down here this morning, I saw there was gilding discovered or discussed. The other thing that you can do is, you might have seen in the invitation I sent out adamantine. Probably everybody who got that, who knows Seth Thomas, said, oh yeah, I know what that is, but you may not know what adamantine is. And somebody says, you have an adamantine case. You can go up right up here in the right-hand corner where it says search, and you can plug in the word. I'm going to try and spell it right the first time, adamantine, and hit enter, and it goes through this section of the forum and pulls up all kinds of things. Look, the first one on the top is adamantine repair. That happens to be the plastic, I call it, plastic that Seth Thomas patented back in like 1905. And he can make a clock look like it's burl oak. He can make it look like it's marble. He can make it look like all by coating wood with this finish. Well, if you had a clock and it had a chip in it or a corner broken off and you wanted to repair it, you could go to the forum and you could go up into the search. If you're doing lacquer, if you're doing satin paint, if you're doing rub and buff is a product name, you could put it into the search and it would go through and it would find all the entries that have that word in it. So there's quite a bit of on the repair here for that, just that one word search. But this is a clue that I wanted to share with people, and I'm not being sponsored by the NAWCC or encouraged by them, but I have people ask me a lot about shellac, about different finishes on clocks and how to repair them. And this is where I direct them. I have played with a lot of different finishes, and this is a good place to go and read about other people's experiences. Before I close this out, anybody have any questions about how I got here? Or this just happens to be under case construction and restoration. The NAWCC forum is easily navigated. You see, I'm just clicking back arrows to go back to where I was. It has clock discussions, watch discussions, repairs, horological, miscellaneous. But this is a good place to go. If you don't like to watch advertisements come across the bottom of the screen, all you have to do is log in and they disappear.
Frank, how did you get to, I didn't see the search. I should know because I've been on these things before, but how did you get to the search adamantine on?
Okay, what I did was I first was in the case construction and restoration. Okay, and then right up here in the corner, it says,
oh, you can use that search. Okay.
And then clicked on it and just typed in a word. Rub and buff.
There you go. Okay.
All about that. And that happens to be a product name. But the search is very good. And I use it quite a bit. So gilding, if you're going to do gilding, if you're wondering about horsehide glue, if you're wondering about all those things, you get answers to it here. So, yeah. So I will stop sharing and we'll let Ed Brown and Tim drop in here. So that's my secret resource. I know people know that I read a lot of books. I have an extensive library on horology, but when I start to try and figure something out, I like to start in the forum. So it works well. I want to ask Beverly, you had a clock case that had like alligator looking skin on it.
Yes.
And what was the advice you got on restoring that finish?
Well, I used the formula that Sam suggested to me, and worked with that with applied it with some 4 gold grit
Steel
wool. And I did that a couple of times, and then I waxed it, and I was very pleased with the way it turned out. It still has the alligator in there, but it just has a much better look to it. It's not as scruffy looking, and it has a nice sheen to it. And I also, on another case, tried some cleaner that Tom, I believe it was, recommended to my husband, and we got some of that, and it worked very well. And then after I cleaned it, all I really had to do was again apply some wax, and it's a different look because it didn't have all the alligatoring, but it looks great.
Yeah. So that people know, Sam's magic formula is it's dishwashing liquid, isn't it? And
yeah, this was the cider vinegar, boiled linseed oil, and turpentine, I believe.
Okay. All right. Sam Thornton is very knowledgeable on different finishes on cases, and he has some combinations of stuff that are basically cleaners. A lot of times you don't have to completely restore a finish. If you spend some time and properly clean it without removing it, then a simple application of some wax can really make a difference on your finish. Sure, that's great. Ed Brown, have you ventured into restoring finishes on clock cases?
Primarily the wood-based ones, and I've done the metal ones. I've actually stripped it down and took it to a metal case, to a guy that sandblasted it off, and that turned out pretty good. So because then I had nothing but flat surface to work on. So painted it up.
And that was a metal enamel on a metal case.
Yeah, it was an Ansonia, and it turned out pretty good. So,
and those Ansonia cases, the wooden ones, it was not only Ansonia but Seth Thomas, all made these mantle clocks, and some of them had pillars on them. And sometimes people will paint those gold, or they'll rewrap them with paper, different things to make them look like they're marbled. I recently ventured down that avenue, and I went to a clock supply house and purchased a piece of paper, and they say they're all different so that they look like marble. Well, they look like great big marble. You're trying to something that's like this big around and this tall, you want it proportionately to look like marble. So I went on a wild goose chase, and I found on YouTube that there's this product, these enamel paints, and I'll put it on my letter with the recording. But the crazy thing about it is you take enamel paint and you fill a cup up with water, and you pour this enamel paint on the top of it, and you can do multiple colors at a time. I did, after painting them black or red, I then used yellow and black and red, a different red color, and just swirled it on the top of the water, stuck my finger into that column and dipped it in, turned it, took it out, and it put lines on it and made it look like marble. It was, I was really impressed with the outcome. It took a little practice, but on YouTube, they show people covering coffee cups, water mugs, all kinds of sneakers, all kinds of things with this. Put the enamel paint on the surface of the water and dip things through it. So there's a lot of wild things going on out there. So I wanted to also, I've used the word rub and buff several times. Has anybody had any experience with rub and buff? It's actually a hard Cordoba wax that's been colored, and you can buy it in multiple colors. I think Beverly, at the last time I talked with you, you had said that you'd come across some of that and were considering it. I have a French case right there that's pewter, and I actually had a dial that needed to be redone. It was soapstone, and I used the rub and buff to fill where the dial had been etched, and it was rubbed it in and buffed it off. And boy, it was tough to buff that hard wax off, but it several people have used it for different applications. If you go into the forum and search rub and buff, you're going to go columns on this clock. The columns on the front of it are supposed to be gold, and I'm thinking of using rub and buff on it. It'll go on metal, it'll go on wood, it'll all of those different things. So I'm not paid to promote any products, but I use a lot of different products to get the results that I want on my clocks. So shellac is a big topic. Application of shellac. Anybody use shellac, whether it's with a brush or whether they French polish with it?
I've used shellac before on those wood cases, and I put a 4 or 5 coats or more on it, and it shined up really good, maybe more than the original manufacturer put on there. But you know,
Did you use a French buffing method with a pad?
no, I just painted it on there, and although I do have some new mini pads I bought at the hardware store. Because I wanted to try them out on my next project, but it worked out pretty good. I wanted to I bought the little pads to eliminate the strokes showing up on the finish.
Yeah.
So.
And the question is always, what about store-bought shellac in a can versus shellac flakes that you melt yourself?
I have both, but I used the can one because I was in a hurry.
And I've done both as well, and sometimes I find it's just as easy to thin a can from the hardware store than it is to try and get the right consistency and color and all from flakes. So Bill, I know you've done some restoration on model trains and different things. Have you ever come across and used shellac to try and?
Well, I typically use as I try to weather them, I use airbrushing a lot of times. It makes it looks like it's been sitting outside for a while. Is what I do, and it works out as well as buildings, stuff like that on the layout. And it works out really well. Airbrushing does. You get the highlights.
Airbrush is something that I've encouraged people to purchase the pen size and get a little compressor and practice, 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 and then
It takes practice. I'm not very good at it, but I, like everything else, like clocks and trains, I listen to people like you guys. Just
Yeah.
learn.
my here in the Louisville area, there's a gentleman, Pat Higdon. I drop his name as often as I can because he's a good mentor, and he lives by the airbrush and just does some beautiful work in restoring statues and all kinds of things. So
It's amazing what you do with it.
yeah. Well, I know Sherry, you're preserve railroad clocks. When I see the clocks that you and your husband gather together, I always think this clock has been preserved as original can be. Do you have tips about cleaning up to preserve as opposed to restore?
Well, that's a good question. Glenn, can you answer that question? Do you have a good method of preserving as opposed to restoring the clocks that come to you in such original condition? He's getting up and coming over here. Yeah, I mean, usually, like you said, Frank, he's got some really good examples, and it's amazing how people have kept those in such pristine condition for as long as they have. Clocks, they're talking about cases and restoring cases. But he says, do you have some, he knows yours are in pristine condition, most of the railroad clocks you have. Do you have some tips on preserving them in that condition as opposed to restoring? Because you don't have to restore anything. They're all in great condition. I would think
that's correct. And that's the reason I've got clocks that are in that condition, because I want the original finish without it being alligator. I mean, there's nothing.
But sometimes, wood will crack and stuff in dry and stuff like that.
It shrinks. I mean, you have shrinkage cracks and problems like that, but there's nothing you can do about it.
But you would just let it go. You wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I do. But I mean, I don't restore cases.
Yeah, I know.
I wouldn't have it. It's got a restored finish. The clock is worthless.
I know there's a lot of times they say you put some kind of an oil on it or to keep them from cracking and stuff like that when it's, because all wood will do that, but apparently he thinks just let it go.
I can refinish cases. I mean, I'm a woodworker. I've been doing woodworking for about 60 years.
I know. Yeah.
But when you put a new finish on an old product, an old antique, you have ruined the provenance of the antique.
Yeah, but but you and I both agree if it's too ugly and too alligator, do something with it. It's better to have it look nice than.
Yeah. and that brings us back to the top of our discussion where I pointed out that if it's your clock, you have to decide how it's going to appear, whether it's going to be in its original patina and all that, or whether you want it to have a shine, or whether, and it goes for dials, pendulums, and in the discussion that we've had here this morning, we talk about the case itself and doing that. I've seen cases that were spray painted, and you can tell when they've been spray painted. And people have asked, can you do something with this finish? When I'm restoring somebody else's clock, I happen to think much in line with what Glenn was sharing. If I take somebody else's clock and make it look brand new, when I put it back on their wall and the first time it rings and they look at it, they're going to go, well, that's not my clock. Right? So I, as Glenn said, if it's somebody else's clock, I tend to leave it in exactly the appearance that it is and make it mechanically sound. So, but we've had a little discussion. We've learned a little bit about where we can go to find answers and get, if you ask a question in the forum, you're going to get 20 responses, 20 different answers. So that's just the nature of clock guys and watch people. It was fun to think about all of those things this morning.
I mean, it's a little bit off subject, but something that I had a problem with on the clock was that on the inside, it was real, the wood was powdery on the inside of the case, and it was real dry and musty smelling. I coated it with linseed oil
Mhm.
just to seal it, and it seemed to work out really well. I don't know what I'm doing, obviously, but it worked.
Yes. Yeah. And I've seen old clocks that have that powdery, and particularly if it's been in a house where people smoke, you have to do something to clean it up just so it's a little more attractive.
It seemed like it sealed the surface and made it a lot more easy, at least to me.
Yep.
It worked. That's right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, if anybody else has anything else to share this morning, I encourage you to always bring questions when you go to a meeting, a chapter meeting, a regional. If you can't carry it with you, as Beverly does, she says, "What do I do with this?" Then take pictures, bring them along, because there is safety in a multitude of counselors. You might get 10 answers, but then you can go away and say, "Oh, well, I've got some idea of direction I can go with my clock." So that's great. Well, I want to thank you all. I got my shot. I encourage people to get their shots. We're going into the winter time, and we'll all be confined indoors with trapped air and all that other stuff. So go out there and get your vaccination so that we can all stay healthy. Until then, remember, if you're in a crowd, mask up, always wash your hands, and please don't stand so close to me. We'll see you next week. Watch for the invitation.
Thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Frank.
Yep.